good to go. Great to meet you.
Good.
Thank you for taking a minute out.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So before we get into your life and work, which is with trauma, we went through quite a bit with COVID over those last 3 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I'm curious how you survived that time period and how it's changed the way that you do things now.
Yeah. How I survived it. I was living in Germany at the time, and so I had a different sort of experience than the typical American, maybe because I was under the German regulations initially,
Yeah.
but we had a forest. Like we were able to go outside and be in nature, and they highly recommended that. And so, and we could even be with other people so long as there was distancing. And I just found that in nature, like the birds and the trees didn't know about COVID. It was a
Yeah.
place where I could go and it felt normal. And it was just so good, not only just to be outside breathing fresh air and in nature, but like in a place that wasn't touched in the way that everything else was. And then I guess since then, just far more awareness around the fact that we have all globally experienced the traumatic event, and that a lot of the things that are happening now in the aftermath are a result of different people's response to that traumatic event. And so that's given me a lot more, I think, compassion and insight for people living messy lives right now, right? Like, or just feeling messy. We're all trying to get our footing under us again, and it's caused a lot of division, but I think
Yeah.
also a lot of unity in some ways. But it's also showed me how important community is to our survival brain. We don't think of that. We think of COVID as it was a threat to my physical survival, but it was actually a greater threat to our emotional survival, our belonging survival. And so it's been interesting to sort of watch people not have awareness around that, but still trying to navigate what does it look like to live in a world where I might kill someone, and yet I'm desired to experience safety in community.
It's interesting because the thing that kept us together was the technology, which
Yeah.
it technically does keep us separated from each other. But
Yeah.
in that process, we realized we needed each other. It's very,
Yeah.
the irony is weird, very weird. I remember at one point, I was an essential worker and I work in a school district as an IT
Yeah.
technician. And I was driving through a rural area and I saw a dog chasing a deer. And I never see anything
Yeah.
like that. Like there was things like the world kind of got quieter, and I think the
Yeah.
animals were like, "Oh, all these loud people are not around right now," and
Yeah.
they just went for it. So
Yeah, they did.
there's some weird things going on. Well, not for
Yeah.
them. I mean, that's nature, but at any rate, it was
Yeah,
interesting.
for
So
us.
there's a lot of things going on with your title and your background. So I want to get to the
Yeah.
essence of what you do. So I'm going to hypothetically put you in front of a bunch of third graders. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So you're at career day. One of the kids looks up and says, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How do you answer them?
I would say I help people tell their stories, write their stories, and publish their stories to turn them into books so that other people can enjoy them too. And yeah, that's what I would say to third graders.
Okay. All right. Yeah, no, I get it. Sometimes brevity is the best. So did your business kind of explode a little bit after COVID? Did it make you?
Yeah. Yeah, actually it kind of did. So I was living in Germany. It's like during COVID, maybe a year and a half in, I ended up moving back to the US. And that matters because like the way I worked changed. I had been working from home in Germany, but then there was a lot of transition and change. And so I didn't expect really to be doing what I'm doing full time. I love it. My education is all in therapy. So
Okay.
it's been this convergence of things that I geek out on related to our cognitive wiring and the brain and trauma and resilience, but then seeing how helping people tell their stories and understand why and where they're getting stuck when they do so, whether it's verbally or in a book, and then helping them see the impact of that story on the world around them when they're brave to share it is so healing and such a piece of resilience. And so to see those kind of converge has given me a really unique position to help people do more than just write and publish a book.
Yeah.
They're going to heal and then experience the deep rewards of seeing their life story not wasted because other people now are being impacted by it. And that's not just memoir. It's easy to think I'm speaking only of memoir, but that can be a children's fiction book. Every story we put in the world, we are wrestling with to some degree pieces of ourselves. And so I help people tell whatever story, however it's coming out, in a way that supports them from a resilience post-traumatic growth perspective, but also the world around them.
It has to be hard. Probably the hardest part for the writer is reliving that trauma.
It's a huge part of it. And they don't always understand that that's the problem. It might be, oh, I'm just too busy, or oh, I just can't, I'm not disciplined, or whatever it might be. And that's where I love to jump in and start to poke around and go, oh, we all have the same 24 hours. People have published books who've had very little time, but made it work, right? When it matters, we make it work. But I can come in with that therapeutic angle and say, actually, your brain, like your survival team in your brain, is all kinds of activated. It does not want to go back there. So what does it look like to let this actually be a healing experience versus just a triggering experience? And then knowing when to push and when to pull back to usher somebody through that is an important piece.
Yeah, absolutely. So what did you want to be in the third grade?
Yeah. Well, for a little while, I told my parents I wanted to be a bag lady, which I meant to fill bags at the grocery store. I just thought that was the coolest job. And then
Yeah.
in Germany, you do have to fill your own bags at the grocery store. So I kind of got to live out that dream. But for a little while, I wanted to work at SeaWorld. I grew up in San Diego. I wanted to work with whales and dolphins. And then, yeah, I guess I'm all over the place. I wanted to work in the zoo, in the nursery with the monkeys, a little bit as a teacher. Yeah, and I think back then, I say this in one of my TEDx talks, I didn't know you could grow up and be an author. So even though I loved writing, it never came across me as an option of something what I could do for the rest of my life. So it was just like, well, then how can I cuddle cute animals or swim with them or something?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So are you back in San Diego?
I am now in the Central Valley of California. I would love to
Okay.
be in San Diego, but no.
I went there this summer on a road trip and it's wonderful down there.
It's beautiful. It's so
Man.
beautiful. Yeah. My roots are definitely there.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So let's go to your roots.
Yeah.
What was it about growing up that gave you the desire to not only love stories, but to therapeutically want to help people and to get to this point in
Yeah.
your life?
It's a really great question because, right, we all have a story.
Yeah,
And that's a big piece of it. So growing up, for me, was on welfare for a number of years with a single parent, a single mom. And I just took on a message very young that nobody fed to me directly, but I took on a message that my existence cost people, right? That there was the element of a burden ship that came with my existence. And again, nobody put that on me. I just, maybe for my intuition of reading the room around me and trying to understand life, yeah, you have to spend money to get me clothes or to feed me or whatever it was. And so from really young, I tried to be as little of a burden as possible. If someone was giving away food, like in elementary school years at the Boys and Girls Club, I would bring all that food home and try to help. I worked all through high school in the school cafeteria so that I could get free meals. Nobody put that pressure on me. So I think there was just a real sense of I don't belong here and I don't fit in here, and I'm better off being as small as possible. And as I grew, that really harmed me in the relationships I chose to be part of, and the marriage I chose to be part of, and the way I parented early on. I mean, there was so much of it that was still just about making life easier for everyone else by being as small as possible. And that gave me such a heart for anyone else that seemed to be living small. And so from childhood, in my school, that might have been racial prejudices. If I saw a kid being targeted, I was immediately right there. Like I was for the underdog, whoever the underdog was. And I think it was just me acting out what I wish I could do for myself or that someone would do for me. But at
yeah.
the very least, I could light on fire on behalf of someone else. And that has traveled with me. I mean, my degrees are in social work and counseling and intercultural studies. Like the things I went after were those kinds of things. And then when I discovered how many gatekeepers are in the world to prevent actual voices from being heard, that became my new passion and kind of the way that I channel that. is to remove those obstacles so that everyone has a chance to be heard. And then I find we resonate with each other when someone shares their story of being silenced or choosing silence or whatever their story is, their hard thing. So many other people like, really? I thought it was just me. And so that is so rewarding to me to experience on behalf of my authors, but even on behalf of my own writing and speaking. So that's kind of the roots piece and how it's traveled with me all the way to now.
So the things that get us to where we want to go are
Yeah.
those that we admire or look up to. Who's kind of been a hero or a role model for you?
Yeah, I usually like to have unique answers to things, but Brene Brown is my answer. And I know she's like been a hero to so many people, but
Yeah.
her work on vulnerability and shame and bravery and speaking those things out um, have given me language to use in my own work in understanding myself. And I mean, there's such a bravery that she's had to do. I remember hearing about her first or her TEDx or TED talk, I don't know, her talk, and how she was so embarrassed by it and almost called them to have them pull it down. And then she's like, oh, no one will watch it. And I think it was like the next day, it was in the tens of thousands of people watching it. And so I think of her often. I'm grateful that she has shared that story because I think, wow, she didn't go out there thinking she had all the answers and she was going to help everyone. She had all the same insecurities, imposter syndrome, everything else. And yet the impact she's made has been incredible. And so I don't want to hold that back from people in my own insecurities. And I coach my authors the same. Like, what if that person that so impacted you had given in to their fear and insecurity and you didn't have their words? Like, don't be that person.
Yeah.
So yeah, she's been a huge impact to me.
So you may have already answered my next question, but if you could meet anybody on the planet right now and spend a little time with them, who would it be?
Oh, if I could meet anyone on the planet, that's a great question.
So I got a quick story while you think
Yeah,
about
yeah,
that.
do that.
I just heard a podcast and Travis Barker was on it, and he knows a guy that I think is out in LA or out in that area that took a vow of silence and hasn't spoken to anybody in 22 years. He's fully functional,
Yeah,
totally lives his life. What happens to someone therapeutically to get to that point? I mean, I know you can't get in there, but if you peel back the educational layers of what you know of the human mind and what would happen to someone to just literally not speak most of their lives at all?
yeah, yeah. Man, it would make me want to poke at all sorts of things to try to get to some motivation there. Like, why was that decision made, and what's been the benefit internally to him keeping to it so long?
Yeah, true.
I mean, I would imagine that if it's healthy for him, that he's got some kind of really strong internal base and some other ways of somehow connecting or having an outlet. Um, if it was less healthy, there's still some kind of outlet. Like, we're still wired for forms of connection, so he'd be getting it another way.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really fascinating.
It's
I
weird.
would have a lot of questions.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I think it's fascinating, but I just, wow. I mean, obviously, with what I'm doing and with what you're doing, with podcasting and TEDx and whatnot, and therapy, I couldn't imagine not going a day without
No.
it. My son's on the autism spectrum, and he was a kid. When I heard them talking about that, when he was young, he didn't speak for a long time. I can't even remember. It's been so long ago.
Yeah.
He's 18 now. But I
Yeah.
remember I used to always ask the therapist, just tell me if he's not going to talk, I just want to get prepared. And she's like, oh, no,
Yeah.
it's fine. He'll talk one day. And I just
Yeah.
never believed it. And this morning I was just thinking about the conversations that we had and how many
Mm,
I mean, it's weird how life works. And I couldn't imagine not being able to do that. It just seems like
no.
you know,
I
but
know. I've done it for like a week or a few days or something, like as part of a retreat. And it
yeah,
was so hard, but so informative. But then you come back out of it and you connect again.
yeah,
Um, yeah. I mean, I imagine that person would have to have such a rich inner world, like autistic people do, right? They
right.
have such a rich inner workings that doesn't really need anyone else. But then that's also coming through a unique brain dynamic. So
Yeah.
it's not neurotypical, it's divergent in that
Yeah.
way, and so it's unique. So yeah, those would be the questions I'd like poke at for this person
Uh-huh.
too. It's like, wow, you must be wired very uniquely to just be self-entertained.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we are designed in such a way that we might lean a direction, introversion or extroversion, but we always have a balance within us.
Yeah.
And so that kind of gets into Myers-Briggs and Jungian kind of psychology, but we are designed with balance. So even somebody who's like, oh, I'm just an introvert, I don't need people, does still need people and will
Yeah.
demonstrate that in the outer world in some way. So I'd just be fascinated about that,
Yeah, I
kind
would too.
of.
What is it that ultimately motivates you? What is every day you get
Oh,
up, what's the chief motivator for you to get done and to do what you want to do and to help people?
yeah. I think it goes back to your original question about my roots. I think there is such a longing to see other people feel known and seen and valued and heard in all the ways that I didn't primarily. And then as I've gotten healthier and formed really healthy friendships, the gift of being seen and heard and known and valued is also so powerful. And so I want to prevent people from experiencing the lack and give them a taste of the abundance and in the ways that I can. Obviously, I am an introvert. I cannot be everybody's everything to give that to them, but I can step in and help them find it, or at least validate the importance of their stories or their desire to tell story, whatever that might be. And so I think it still just stems from that. Like, I don't want anyone to feel like they don't say, I even feel it emotionally as I'm saying that. I don't want anyone to feel like they don't matter or are insignificant or don't have value, because that is a really crummy place to live. And we see it in our society all around us, showing up in different ways, right? The rise of suicides in our youth, and not just our youth and adults, the rise of anger, right? If we're not killing ourselves, we're taking it out on everyone around us. And I don't just mean anger, I mean explosive,
Yeah.
destructive expressions of anger. And so we're just surrounded by a world of people who are faking it to some degree, so that even if we see somebody who looks all put together, they're also wondering if they're significant, if they've arrived, if it's enough. And I'm kind of done with people not knowing that they deserve love and value and have worth, So in my own little sphere, I try to help do that. And that motivates me. If I can give something to somebody like that, then that feels very satisfying.
Sure, sure. So as someone that continues to push the storytelling book further, so to speak, literally and figuratively, what was the book for you early on that you read that made you think either I want to read or I want to ingest more of these stories?
Yeah, that's a good question too. That's like asking, a mom her favorite child or which one impacted. Oh man. I mean, as a child, one of my go-to favorites was Stand Back, Said the Elephant, I'm Going to Sneeze. And I didn't know actually until I included that in one of my TEDx talks why that impacted me like it did. But revisiting it as an adult and rereading it and thinking through, like, what was the message I was getting internally from this story? Because the elephant, when he sneezes, causes a lot of havoc and everyone gets really upset. The alligator's snout turns inside out, the giraffe's neck ties up in a knot, the bees lose their stings and wings, and it's just this catastrophic thing. And then at the end, I'll just spoiler alert, um, a little mouse scares him so that he doesn't sneeze, but then he's so tickled that a mouse made him not sneeze that he laughs hysterically. And all the same things happen because he laughed, and the mouse in the end like plops into a little pond or a little, puddle. And it's just like, oh, you elephant. So it's not like the elephant's not in a good light. He
Yeah.
still causes all the problems, but there was something where it was still, I don't know, it was like I got to experience a character being so disruptive and so messy and everyone being, begging him to not be. But at the end of the day, like he was still okay and he laughed and had a great time. And I think there was something in me that needed to see a character like be okay
Yeah.
at the end of like causing so much catastrophe. And so I don't know that one made me think about writing, but it definitely was an early book that resonated with me at a deep subconscious level that I didn't understand until adulthood. And I probably still only understand in part. Um, and then I always loved Where the Sidewalk Ends.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was just like generational or what, but I just loved the creativity of the little mini stories. And then I don't Oh gosh, there's so many books. I mean, I could just keep
Yeah.
going on all the books that have impacted me, but I think what got me eventually into writing was that I met someone who was writing for children and was published. And I thought, okay, I think it has to do with having a foot in the door. Like, who do you know who's already in? And so I started then playing with children's book ideas with more of a professional aim. And then from there just took off. I'm pretty genre diverse. I've written all of it.
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially the answer is all of your children are your favorite children.
All of my children are my favorite
There you
children.
go. That,
Yeah.
that's it.
Yeah. They
Yeah.
keep impacting me. And there's a quote by Flannery O'Connor. She says, "I write because I don't know what I think until I read what I say."
Yeah. I get that.
And that has been 100% my story. Like when I write, it's first for me. And then when I'm like reflecting on what I've written, I start to understand myself.
Hmm.
And then in that process, I'm like, oh, I wonder if this would help someone else. I don't know. I'll just put it out in the world and see. And then I get people who are like, yes, me,
Yep.
that's me. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I think it's almost been less of a book that encouraged me to write, although they all have, but it was really just testing like, oh man, my own words have impacted me and helped me understand myself. I wonder if they'll help anyone else. And then I just keep putting them out there and it appears they do.
That's the cheat. I've written my whole life and in particular poetry, and it's like that's been the the cheapest, most poignant therapy that I could imagine.
Yes. Yep.
You know,
Yeah.
and what's also interesting, and I probably have never ever said this at all in my life, but it's something that I always recognize. Maybe I just am not around podcasters that do audio editing, but I'll get to a point where one of the things that I do as a jazz journalist is I write for a local publication called Jam here in Kansas City. It's kind of the jazz Bible, so to speak. And when I transcribe and transcode audio and write it out, I'm like, wow, I knew what they were saying, but
Yeah.
it really resonated and it got into my bones after that. And it's wild because it's like, it's crazy how the brain works. I think it's one of the reasons why we watch movies over and over again. It's like
Yeah.
you'll start noticing things. Maybe not with Napoleon Dynamite. You just want to laugh the whole time. But, but with other things that have depth, it's like it just kind of starts really seeping in and you're like, I'm getting it more and more.
Yeah. And I could totally geek out on why that is with the brain. And I won't go all because I know our time is limited, but it just fires me up because it's so powerful. It's such a healing thing. So like your survival brain is always looking for tips for survival, right? So when we encounter a story and there's tension in that story and there's what ifs in that story, our brain lights up very uniquely to go, oh, if I'm ever in that situation, I'm probably going to need to know what's going to happen here. Like, will the character do something that works or doesn't work? And what will I learn from that? And so our brain will light up almost completely and in such a way that we're actually physiologically experiencing what we're seeing. And
Yeah.
it'll begin to integrate that information. Well, that means we have to steward what we let in because our brain is always learning from it, but sometimes, it's not actually reality and it's not
Yeah.
actually going to help us. And so our brain will begin to perceive things uniquely. But there's a part of our brain where our traumatic events can get stuck that doesn't have language. And so when we're in talk therapy, let's say, and we're trying to work through traumatic things, we're not going to touch any of the actual trauma because if we have words for it, we're not addressing it. We have to get into the part of our brain that doesn't have language, but is very sensory. So music, writing, body movement, clay, art, whatever it might be, where we can express ourselves in an uncensored way, begins to allow it to process and find its place in the brain. And so that to that point, when you're saying, yeah, we sometimes have to re-experience something over and over. Yeah, that's our trauma brain saying, ooh, I feel like there's something here where I can now assign this to a time and place in history because I'm now gaining skills I didn't have that can help me understand that story. It's
Yeah.
so powerful. Or even you
Yeah.
re-listening to it later, like
Yeah.
is part of that. It's tapping into a part of your brain that needed to like re-experience it. And that's where healing actually truly happens is when we
Wow.
relive the hard thing, but in actual safety. And that's
Yeah.
our bodies resist that unless it's through some form of entertainment, we don't even realize it's happening, right? So I
Yeah.
know I said I wouldn't geek out. I kind of did. I threw a bunch
No.
there, but it's like so fascinating
Yeah.
how our brains engage story.
I've never heard that before. I've never heard that put that way. That's so good. So well said.
Yeah.
What of all the things that you've done and accomplished in your life, what are you the proudest of?
seeing this is I feel this too emotionally. Seeing my own worth. I mentioned how my roots didn't I didn't for a long time, and I also mentioned relationships that brought me to, where I thought I deserved the mistreatment that I experienced. I thought that was the best I could do. I didn't think I deserved love, and through a lot of really traumatic things, divorce and abuse and all sorts of hard things, um, I I'll say both God through my faith experience and the people that he's brought me, um, lined up so perfectly that I began to tell myself new stories. And those were stories of having worth and value. And it started with healthy people around me seeing it in me first and me noticing that, like, you seem to value me. Huh. And I hadn't been around a lot of that. And then I began to realize I did have value. And so I know this isn't accomplishment in the same way as like, oh, I published this many books, or
Yeah,
I published this many authors, but the way that has transformed my life and the way that I'm able to show up for my authors or show up in my therapy work or whatever it might be has so radically changed because there's a new kind of groundedness in me and security in me. And I wish I could claim it. I mean, I guess you just asked me about an achievement. Um, but it feels like a gift that I was able to see that I had been missing. So I don't know if I have any actual ownership over it, but I'm grateful. And I'm still on a long journey, but um changing how I saw myself has changed the relationships that I have. So even just there, some of my friends are the same that I've always had, but I couldn't experience them truthfully until I could experience myself more truthfully. And now those same relationships, now I'm like, oh, you value me. They always had, but now there's a different level of experiencing of it. And so I'm just so grateful that I showed up for that work. So maybe if there's ownership, it's that I was present enough to see it and willing to engage it, and receive it. But yeah, I think that that's the path I want to stay on. And if everything else flows out of that, then it'll be good. And I just want to, um, yeah, remain in the reminder that I
sure.
have something to offer the world and it's valuable and um, yeah, it's just been like a really healthy place these last couple of years.
Sure. So everyone has a perception of you out there. We all have these people in our lives, family,
Yeah.
friends, clients, colleagues, but you live your life. What's your
Yeah.
perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Oh boy.
Yeah, I'm turning the tables on you.
I know. I was like, oh, here we go.
Here we
Yeah,
go.
I just said all this thing about how I'm so healthy and I've grown and changed. And then I'm like, well, my perception of me is that I'm a hot mess. Sometimes I say I'm a functional hot mess. I think my perception of me is kind of connected to that. I'm such a person in progress. Um, and so that both is reassuring and challenging because I have a temptation to lean into those old stories sometimes. Nobody
Yeah.
wants to hear you. You're more beautiful when you're silent. You have nothing to offer. Like these want to come up, but I'm now like challenging those stories. And so it's so messy. So my perception of myself is that I'm on my way. I'm on a journey and it's a good journey. And my perception also it has something to do with and there's still something with worth and deserving like I'm worthy of the journey. It's a good one. And but it's also my responsibility to a degree to stay on it. So I guess it depends on the day. My perception of myself might be I'm the worst human. I'm a horrible parent. And then but I think I keep coming back around to like no, I'm on a journey and I'm actually okay, real quick. Yesterday, I had this like imaginative conversation. I don't know with who, but somebody in my head asked me how I was doing. And my response was, I've been better. And then all of a sudden I was like, you know what? No, I haven't. I haven't been better. I'm actually better now. I've been more rich. Like I've had more money. I've had, a car that had working brakes or whatever. Like circumstantially, things have been different, but I have not been better. This is better. So that kind of thing. Like
Yeah.
I want to sometimes be, or I'm tempted sometimes to like just let the default story
Yeah.
have its place. And then I'm like, no, I haven't been better. I'm
Yeah.
better now.
Yeah.
I don't
Absolutely.
know
I
if I
like
answered
that.
your question at all, but
Yeah. No, it did. It did. It's a big question and it can be daunting. So Anyone
Yeah.
out there that wants to learn more about you, your services,
Yeah.
your life, anything, where can they go?
Yeah. marcypusey.com is a great starting place. So just my first and last name. TEDx talks are listed there, and it will link you to my publishing, storytelling company, Miramar Ponce Press. But you can link there for marcypusey.com. And then I'm on Instagram at Marcy Marie. And so, I'll get messages there too.
Okay. Excellent. Marcy, it was great to meet you.
It
Thank you
was
for
so
taking
great.
time out.
Likewise, thanks for entrusting me with your audience and your time. I so appreciate it.
Absolutely. Best of luck with everything.
Thanks. You too.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye-bye.